Have you ever looked at your bank account balance and felt proud of that nice fat number staring back at you? Maybe you've been diligently saving for years, watching those digits climb higher and higher, thinking you're being financially responsible. Well, what if I told you that keeping too much money in your bank account might actually be one of the worst financial decisions you're making right now? What if that safety net you think you're building is actually a financial trap that's quietly stealing your wealth while you sleep? Most people would call me crazy for suggesting there's such a thing as having too much money in the bank. After all, we've been conditioned to believe that cash is king, that having a big savings account balance means financial security. But here's the uncomfortable truth that your bank definitely doesn't want you to know. Every single day that your money sits in that account, it's losing value. Not just a little bit, but significantly enough to impact your financial future in ways you probably haven't considered. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, inflation, and why most people's financial strategies are completely backwards. If you're someone who actually wants to understand how money works instead of just hoping everything will magically work out, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing how you think about your savings. Now, before I reveal the exact dollar amount you should never exceed in your bank account, let me paint you a picture of what's really happening to your money right now. While you're sleeping peacefully, thinking your savings are safe and sound, inflation is working the night shift, systematically reducing the purchasing power of every dollar you've worked so hard to save. It's like having a slow leak in your financial tire that you can't see, but that's constantly deflating your wealth. The Federal Reserve has a target inflation rate of 2% annually. That might not sound like much, but let me show you what that actually means for your money. If you have $10,000 sitting in a typical traditional savings account, earning maybe 0.5% interest, and inflation is running at 2%, you're effectively losing 1.5% of your purchasing power every single year. That $10,000 will have the buying power of about $9,850 after just 12 months. But here's where it gets really painful. While many traditional savings accounts pay minimal interest, the real impact comes from what inflation does to your purchasing power. Let me give you some concrete examples. Chipotle burrito that cost $8 just a few years ago now costs around $12. The median price of a new car has jumped from about $38,000 to $48,000. When you factor in the rising costs of housing, food, energy, and healthcare, you can see how your money's buying power is being eroded over time. That's not financial security. That's financial suicide in slow motion. So what's the magic number? What's the maximum amount you should keep in your bank account before you start seriously damaging your financial future? The answer is simpler than you might think, but it requires understanding the difference between money you need and money you're hoarding out of fear. Financial experts generally agree that you should keep between 3 to 6 months of living expenses in a readily accessible savings account. Notice I said living expenses, not income. If your monthly bills, groceries, utilities, and other necessities total $4,000, then you should have somewhere between $12,000 and $24,000 in your emergency fund. That's it. Everything beyond that amount is excess cash that should be working harder for you somewhere else. But here's where most people mess this up completely. They look at their monthly income instead of their actual expenses, or they convince themselves they need 12 months of expenses saved up just in case the economy collapses and they can never find work again. This kind of thinking isn't financial prudence. It's financial anxiety masquerading as responsibility. Let's talk about why keeping more than 6 months of expenses in your bank account is actually hurting you. First, there's the inflation problem we already discussed. Your excess cash is guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. But there's also the opportunity cost, which is perhaps even more devastating to your long-term wealth. Every dollar sitting in a traditional savings account earning minimal interest could potentially be invested in assets that historically have delivered solid returns over time. Let's say you have $50,000 in your bank account, but you only need $20,000 for your emergency fund. That extra $30,000, if invested in a diversified portfolio, could grow to over $60,000 in 10 years, assuming a 7% return. By keeping it in your savings account, you'd have maybe $31,000 after a decade. You've literally cost yourself nearly $30,000 by playing it too safe. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but Nick, what if the stock market crashes? What if I lose money? What if? Here's the thing about financial fear. It's usually based on worst case scenarios that rarely happen, and when they do happen, they're typically temporary. Meanwhile, the guaranteed loss from inflation and missed opportunities happens every single day, month after month, year after year. The stock market has experienced numerous crashes throughout history. The dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 panic of 2020. Yet despite all these dramatic events, patient investors who stayed the course have been rewarded handsomely over time. For example, from October 2024 to recent months, the S&P 500 saw gains of over 15%. Demonstrating the market's ability to deliver strong returns even in relatively short periods. But let's address the elephant in the room. What constitutes too much cash isn't just about the specific dollar amount, it's also about your personal situation and risk tolerance. A 25-year-old single person with a stable job and no dependents might be perfectly fine with 3 months of expenses saved. A 50-year-old with a family, mortgage, and variable income might need closer to 6 months. The key is being honest about your actual needs versus your imaginary fears. There's also the psychological aspect of hoarding cash that we need to discuss. Many people keep excessive amounts in their bank accounts, not because they've calculated it's the optimal financial strategy, but because it makes them feel secure. Cash in the bank provides a sense of control and safety that investments don't offer. You can see the exact balance, it doesn't fluctuate, and you know it's there when you need it. This psychological comfort comes at a steep price. While you're feeling secure about your large bank balance, you're actually becoming less secure financially over time. The real security comes from growing your wealth faster than inflation and building multiple income streams, not from accumulating piles of depreciating cash. Here's something else most people don't consider. Banks love it when you keep large balances in low-interest accounts. They take your money and lend it out to other customers at much higher interest rates, essentially using your deposits to generate profits for themselves. You're providing them with cheap capital while earning almost nothing in return. It's a fantastic deal for them and a terrible deal for you. The banking industry has done an excellent job of convincing people that keeping money in savings accounts is the responsible thing to do. They've created this narrative that cash equals safety and investments equal risk, but this narrative conveniently ignores the very real risk of inflation and opportunity cost. The truth is, keeping too much money in your bank account is one of the riskiest financial moves you can make because it guarantees you'll lose purchasing power over time. So if keeping excessive cash in your bank account is such a bad idea, what should you do with that extra money instead? The answer depends on your timeline, risk tolerance, and financial goals, but there are several options that make much more sense than letting your money slowly evaporate in a savings account. For starters, you could invest that excess cash in a diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds. This isn't some get-rich-quick scheme or complicated trading strategy that requires you to become a Wall Street expert overnight. It's simply buying a small piece of thousands of different companies and letting capitalism do what it does best over time. Historically, diversified stock portfolios have delivered strong returns over long periods, which means your money has the potential to grow substantially instead of losing value to inflation. If the thought of putting money in the stock market makes you break out in a cold sweat, start small. Take just the amount above your 6-month emergency fund and invest half of it. Keep the other half in your savings account if it helps you sleep better at night. As you get more comfortable seeing your investments grow over time, you can gradually shift more of your excess cash into productive assets. Real estate is another option worth considering, though it requires significantly more capital and isn't as liquid as stocks. If you have enough excess cash sitting around, you might consider investing in rental properties or real estate investment trusts that pay dividends. Real estate has historically been an excellent hedge against inflation because property values and rents tend to rise along with the general price level. For those who are more entrepreneurially minded, that excess cash could be invested in yourself through education, skills development, or starting a side business. The return on investment from learning new skills or building income streams can far exceed what any traditional investment offers. That $20,000 sitting uselessly in your savings account could fund a certification program, online courses, or the startup costs for a business that generates passive income for years to come. But here's where a lot of people get paralyzed by analysis. They know they should do something with their excess cash, but they spend months or even years researching the perfect investment strategy, comparing different options, and waiting for the ideal moment to start. Meanwhile, inflation continues eating away at their purchasing power every single day they delay. The perfect investment strategy doesn't exist. The perfect time to start investing was yesterday. The second best time is today. You don't need to have everything figured out before you begin. You just need to start moving your money from assets that are guaranteed to lose value into assets that have a reasonable chance of growing over time. Now, let's talk about what happens when you actually implement this strategy and start keeping the right amount in your bank account. First, you'll probably feel a little uncomfortable. That's normal. You've been conditioned to believe that cash equals security, so reducing your bank balance might trigger some anxiety initially. This discomfort is actually a good sign because it means you're breaking out of the financial comfort zone that was keeping you stuck. Within the first year, you'll likely notice something interesting happening to your mindset. Instead of focusing on accumulating cash, you'll start thinking more strategically about growing wealth. You'll become more conscious of inflation and opportunity costs. You'll start making financial decisions based on math rather than emotions. This shift in perspective is often more valuable than the actual investment returns because it changes how you approach money for the rest of your life. Here's something that might surprise you about emergency funds. The people who are most worried about not having enough cash readily available are often the same people who have never actually needed to use their emergency fund for a real emergency. They've created this elaborate worst-case scenario in their heads where they'll suddenly need access to massive amounts of cash immediately, but when you examine their actual financial history, this scenario has never materialized. Real emergencies are usually much smaller and more manageable than people imagine. A car repair might cost $1,500. A medical bill could be a few thousand. Job loss, while scary, rarely requires you to immediately withdraw huge sums of cash because unemployment benefits and severance packages provide some buffer time. The scenarios where you need instant access to $50,000 in cash are extremely rare, yet many people structure their entire financial strategy around these unlikely events. Even if a major emergency did occur that required more cash than you have in your emergency fund, you have options. You could sell some of your investments, though this isn't ideal during market downturns. You could use a line of credit or credit cards temporarily while you liquidate assets. You could borrow against your retirement accounts in extreme circumstances. The point is, having every possible dollar sitting in a savings account just in case isn't the only way to handle unexpected expenses. Let's address another common objection to this strategy. Some people argue that they need large cash balances because they're planning to make a major purchase soon, like buying a house or a car. This makes sense if you're genuinely planning to make that purchase within the next 12 to 18 months, but if you're talking about buying a house someday in the vague future, or you think you might need a new car in the next few years, you're using potential future purchases as an excuse to avoid investing. Here's a better approach for planned purchases. If you know you'll need $20,000 for a down payment in 2 years, keep that money in a high yield savings account or short-term certificates of deposit. Don't invest money you'll need within the next 2 years in the stock market because short-term volatility could work against you. But don't keep money you won't need for 5 or 10 years sitting in savings just because you might possibly maybe someday want to buy something with it. The wealthy understand something about cash that most people miss entirely. Cash is a tool, not a goal. They keep enough cash on hand to handle immediate needs and take advantage of opportunities, but they don't hoard it. They understand that cash flow is more important than cash accumulation. They'd rather have assets generating monthly income than a huge pile of money earning nothing in the bank. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive aspects of building wealth. The less cash you have sitting around, the more motivated you become to create additional income streams. When you know you only have a few months of expenses saved, you're more likely to pursue that promotion, start that side business, or develop skills that increase your earning potential. Having too much cash can actually make you complacent and less driven to improve your financial situation. There's also a behavioral economics principle at work here called Parkinson's Law, which states that expenses expand to fill available income. The same principle applies to cash reserves. The more money you have sitting in your bank account, the more likely you are to spend it on unnecessary things. When you keep your cash reserves lean and purposeful, you're forced to be more intentional about your spending decisions. But let's be practical about implementing this strategy. You don't need to immediately withdraw 90% of your savings and dump it into the stock market tomorrow. That would be reckless and could cause you to panic and make poor decisions if markets decline shortly after you invest. Instead, create a systematic plan to gradually reduce your excess cash over time. Start by calculating your true monthly expenses, not your income, not what you think you spend, but your actual necessary expenses. Add up your rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, minimum debt payments, and other essentials. Multiply that number by 6 to determine your maximum emergency fund target. Everything above that amount is excess cash that should be deployed elsewhere. Once you've identified your excess cash, don't move it all at once. Instead, transfer about 25% of the excess amount into investments every month over 4 months. This dollar-cost averaging approach reduces the risk of investing everything right before a market correction and helps you get comfortable with the process gradually. During this transition period, you might experience something I call cash withdrawal syndrome. You'll check your bank balance and feel momentarily panicked because the number is smaller than you're used to seeing. This is completely normal and will fade as you start watching your investments grow. Think of it like weaning yourself off financial training wheels. It feels scary at first, but eventually you realize you were more stable without them. Here's where things get really interesting. As your excess cash gets deployed into productive assets, you'll start noticing opportunities you never saw before. Maybe you'll spot a great deal on a rental property because you're not emotionally attached to keeping every dollar in your savings account. Perhaps you'll finally invest in that course or certification that could boost your income because you're not hoarding cash out of fear. The psychological shift from cash accumulator to wealth builder is profound. Instead of asking yourself how much money you can save, you'll start asking how much wealth you can create. Instead of feeling proud about your bank balance, you'll feel excited about your net worth growth. This mindset change alone is worth more than any specific investment return because it transforms how you approach money for decades to come. Now let's talk about what the optimal bank account balance actually looks like in practice. For most people, this sweet spot falls somewhere between $15,000 and $45,000, depending on their monthly expenses and family situation. If you're single with low expenses, $15,000 might be plenty. If you have a family and higher living costs, $45,000 could be appropriate. The key is tying this number to your actual needs rather than some arbitrary amount that makes you feel good. But here's something that might shock you. Some of the wealthiest people I know keep surprisingly little cash in their bank accounts. They understand that cash is like ice cream on a hot day. The longer you hold on to it, the less valuable it becomes. They keep enough to handle immediate needs and opportunities, but everything else is working hard in investments, real estate, or businesses. This doesn't mean they're financially reckless. Quite the opposite. They've created multiple income streams and have access to credit when needed, which provides more real security than a pile of depreciating cash ever could. They've learned that true financial security comes from cash flow and asset growth, not from accumulating money that loses value over time. The irony is that many people who think they're being conservative by keeping large cash balances are actually taking enormous risks. They're guaranteed to lose purchasing power to inflation, they're missing out on compound growth, and they're creating a false sense of security that prevents them from taking the calculated risks necessary to build real wealth. So there you have it. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in your bank account and put everything else to work before inflation turns your financial fortress into a house of cards. Your future self will thank you for making your money work as hard as you do. Stop letting your bank get rich off your fear and start building the wealth you actually deserve.